My stepmom got me banned from my dad's business meetings for being a distraction, so I bought out his competitor and made her pitch to me. If you've ever been the quiet kid in a loud family, you know how easy it is to be ignored until you're suddenly inconvenient. That was me, Jordan. I was 23 when the whole thing really began, but the roots go way back. My dad is a self-made businessman. Built a regional logistics company from the ground up with nothing but a rusted-out truck and a credit card. He's got that alpha energy, doesn't like to explain himself, doesn't slow down for anyone. And growing up, I wanted his approval more than anything. I studied hard, kept my head down, and even got my degree in business, hoping he'd eventually bring me into the fold. But then came Lorraine. My stepmom entered the picture when I was about 16. She was 15 years younger than my dad, impeccably dressed, always armed with a glass of wine and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. At first, I tried to like her. She never outright said anything cruel, but everything about her screamed condescension. She called me bookish, said it like it was a disease. When I graduated magna cum laude, she joked at dinner, "Well, at least you'll always have trivia night." My dad laughed. After college, I asked if I could start shadowing him at the company. I wasn't asking for a VP role or anything, just wanted to learn. He said yes, half distracted as always, but I was excited. For a few months, I showed up to morning meetings, took notes, even offered a few good ideas that they actually used. I was finally feeling like I had a place. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I get an email from HR. Subject: Meeting attendance policy update. It basically said that non-essential personnel, including family members, would no longer be permitted in executive strategy meetings. It was clearly written to sound neutral, but it only applied to me. I was confused at first, but not stupid. I went to my dad, and he shrugged it off. Lorraine thought it might be distracting for the team. Don't take it personally, kid. Distracting. Like I was a child. Like I wasn't there trying to learn and contribute. Like I wasn't qualified. I was pissed, but more than that, I was disappointed. My own dad didn't have my back. And Lorraine? She smiled at me over dinner that night, sipping her wine, and said, "Sometimes separation between personal and professional is healthiest." I swallowed it. Didn't say a word. Just nodded and said I understood. But something in me shifted. That's the thing about being quiet. People think you don't notice, don't plan, don't act. But I do. I always have. I spent the next year working on my own. I freelanced as a supply chain consultant, did some cold outreach on LinkedIn, picked up clients from small e-commerce shops, warehouse operations, regional shipping centers. Nothing fancy, but I built a reputation for solving hard problems fast. And I listened, a lot. People in the industry talked. Word traveled. I started to hear things about my dad's main competitor, a firm called Evermark Logistics. Evermark had been around almost as long as my dad's company. They weren't as big, but they were smarter with tech, faster to adapt, leaner. The owner, Alan, was getting ready to retire. No kids. No succession plan. I reached out under a professional alias, Jordan Michelson, not Jordan Monroe. We met twice before he realized who I really was. When he did, he laughed so hard I thought he might choke. "You want to buy me out from under your old man's nose?" he asked, wheezing. "That's ballsy." "I want to do better than both of you," I replied. It took 6 months of negotiation. I called in every contact I had, pitched investors, leveraged some partnerships I'd built during my freelance work. It wasn't easy. I lived off ramen, drained my savings, and put everything on the line. But eventually, I signed the papers. At 25, I became the majority owner of Evermark Logistics. I didn't announce it to the world. Not yet. I kept my name low profile and let the firm keep running under the existing branding. I wanted time to stabilize operations, streamline tech, and get to know the team. And then came the golden opportunity. Lorraine. See, after she got her way with the meeting ban, she started inserting herself more aggressively into my dad's business. She'd been pitching some branding overhaul idea she thought would attract luxury shipping clients. Most people rolled their eyes, but she was persistent. One day, I'm reviewing new client inquiries when I see a proposal request come through. The name on it is hers. She's representing my dad's company, and she's asking Evermark for a partnership on a new initiative. Apparently, the company was hoping to expand into high-end goods delivery. They wanted someone who could guarantee white-glove service and fast turnaround. Evermark was at the top of their list. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then I smiled, because this was it. This was the moment I'd waited for. They had no idea who was on the other side of the table, and I had a pitch meeting to prepare. You know how people say revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, I didn't want cold. I wanted precision. I wanted control. I wanted her to walk into that room and feel like she recognized everything except the power dynamic. I had my team set up the pitch meeting like any other. No special instructions. No announcements. Just a polite response to her request. We'd love to discuss this opportunity in person. Please join us at our office Thursday at 2 p.m. Lorraine confirmed almost instantly. Typical. She always wanted to be seen as the mover and shaker. What she didn't know was that she was walking into a room I designed, not just physically, but metaphorically. Every line in the sand had been drawn. She just hadn't noticed the tide had gone out. Thursday came. I wore a charcoal suit, no tie. Clean cut, professional, quiet authority. That's what I was going for. I stood at the head of the table as my assistant, Kendra, brought Lorraine and two execs from my dad's company into the room. She didn't recognize me right away. I mean, why would she? In her mind, I was still the awkward kid who sat too stiff in meetings and took things too personally. I was the invisible stepson she'd quietly dismissed. She probably assumed I'd gone off to do marketing or something. She walked in with her usual oversized sunglasses perched on her head and a designer folder under one arm like she was about to pitch to Shark Tank. I swear to God, she said, "Wow, this place is cute." Cute. I let it roll off. I nodded at everyone, shook hands. She didn't blink. No flicker of recognition. Nothing. "Thanks for meeting with us," she said to me as she slid into her chair. "Is your boss joining us soon?" I sat down slowly, looked her in the eye. "I am the boss." Her face froze. I don't mean she went pale or gasped. Lorraine was too proud for that. But I've known her long enough to read her micro-reactions, the slight twitch in her cheek, the stiffening of her fingers on the folder, the subtle downward flicker of her eyes before she plastered on a smile. "Oh," she said, after just half a second too long. "Jordan, I didn't realize." "You didn't realize you'd be pitching to the distraction," I said calmly. "Let's begin." And that was it. The table shifted. She knew it. The two execs with her suddenly looked very, very interested in their notes. I let her pitch. I let her stumble over buzzwords and stretch thin ideas across 5 different slide transitions. She proposed rebranding both companies under a joint luxury logistics brand. She called it Monremark. I had to physically stop myself from laughing. By the time she was done, even her own people looked like they wanted to leave. But I kept my expression neutral. I waited for the silence to stretch out just long enough. Then I leaned forward. "Lorraine," I said, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but based on what I've heard today, I'd rate this proposal a 3 out of 10. She blinked. "Excuse me. Your plan lacks cost structure analysis, no data to support ROI, and frankly, it reads more like an Instagram influencer launch than a supply chain solution. We're a logistics company, not a fashion brand." She stammered something about early concepts and how she'd revise. I continued, "That won't be necessary." Then I turned to her colleagues. "I'd be happy to continue discussions with your team directly. We're always open to partnerships, but with professionals who understand the industry." They nodded, eager to escape the tension. Lorraine opened her mouth like she was going to protest, but I gave her nothing to hold on to. Meeting adjourned. As she gathered her things, still trying to keep her composure, she turned back to me. "This was personal, wasn't it?" I tilted my head. "Was it personal when you called me a distraction? When you kept me out of the room where I could have learned something from my father?" She didn't answer. I added, "You helped write the story where I didn't belong. All I did was flip to the next chapter." She left without another word. But that wasn't even the best part. A week later, Everark officially announced our expansion into luxury shipping with one of my dad's other competitors, a company Lorraine had laughed off in her pitch. I didn't have to tell her. Word got around. 2 days after the announcement, I got a call. It was from my dad. "Jordan," he said, "we should talk." I'd been waiting for that. "Sure," I said, "but not in a meeting. I'm not a distraction anymore, remember?" Silence on the line, then a sigh. "I didn't mean it like that." Lorraine just thought. "I know what she thought," I said. "And I know what you didn't say to stop her." He asked if we could meet for coffee. I said I'd think about it. I haven't decided yet. Because here's the thing, I don't hate my dad. I don't even really hate Lorraine. What I hate is the feeling of being disposable, overlooked, like you're only valuable when you're quiet and convenient. They taught me how the world treats people it doesn't take seriously. So I learned how to build a world where I had to be taken seriously. I became the table instead of asking for a seat at it. And I made damn sure that when they finally looked up, they'd realize the view had changed. After Lorraine's failed pitch, things went quiet. Not silent, just quiet in that deliberate, tension-laced way you know means something is coming. That silence where everyone's recalibrating their positions. Watching. Calculating. It wasn't even a week before the industry buzz kicked in. Apparently, word had gotten around faster than I expected. I didn't tell anyone, but Evermark's people talked, and someone must have mentioned who was in the room that day. Suddenly, I wasn't just Jordan who used to work with his dad. I was Jordan, the guy who outplayed his stepmom in a boardroom she thought she owned. A few of my dad's lower execs reached out, off the record, saying things like, "Didn't know you had it in you," or "Honestly, we should have brought you in sooner." I kept the conversations polite, professional, but I didn't forget who those same people had sided with when I got pushed out. Then came the text from my dad. The first one just said, "Lorraine feels bad. She didn't mean to disrespect you." I left it on read. A few days later, "We should talk, one-on-one. No Lorraine. Just us." I didn't respond. It wasn't about vengeance. Not anymore. It was about letting the silence say what they never had the courage to. Letting them sit in the space where my presence used to be. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be seen by them. Now they had to deal with the fact that I didn't need to be. I poured that energy into Evermark. Over the next few months, we overhauled our logistics model. I hired a team of young, hungry problem solvers. People who didn't fit the traditional boardroom look, but who delivered real, measurable results. One of them, Lena, had been fired from a previous firm for being too aggressive with her ideas. She pitched me 3 initiatives in one interview and walked out thinking she'd gone too far. I hired her on the spot. "People like you built this," I told her. "Now let's rebuild it bigger." Meanwhile, back at my dad's company, things were shifting. See, Lorraine had staked her whole reputation on that luxury expansion idea. But after our polite rejection and our subsequent public partnership with her competition, it became obvious she'd overplayed her hand. Her power at the company had always been unofficial, but now even that began to crack. Executives started pushing back. Clients asked subtle questions like, "Is Lorraine still leading brand strategy?" which is corporate speak for "we're nervous." I found out from one of the team members still loyal to me that Lorraine had started showing up to fewer meetings. My dad was handling things himself again. That might have sounded good to outside ears, but I knew him. That meant stress. Chaos. The kind that made him question everything and trust no one. Part of me thought he might actually apologize. Like, really apologize. Not the "let's move past this" corporate version, but an actual moment of accountability. It never came. What had come was an email. Subject line, "Exploring strategic partnership, confidential." It was from my dad. He wanted to talk about a potential merger between Evermark and his company. I stared at it for a long time. This wasn't just business. This was the man who had sat across from me at dinner for years while his wife sliced me down with subtle digs and who never once told her to stop. The man who watched me show up early to meetings and still let her label me a distraction. And now that I'd built something he couldn't ignore, now he wanted to talk? I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Let him sit. Eventually, I responded. I said I'd be open to a meeting, but not at his office. Not over coffee. At Evermark. My space. My terms. He agreed. The meeting day came, and he showed up wearing that same tailored navy suit I'd seen 100 times as a kid when he was rushing out the door to real work while I packed my own school lunches. He looked older. Less sharp. Still proud, though. Still tall. We sat across from each other in the same boardroom Lorraine had once called cute. He looked around, like he was still registering how far I'd come. "You've done well," he said eventually. It sounded like it physically hurt him to say. "I had good teachers," I replied, voice even, and better examples of what not to become. He gave me a tight-lipped nod. "Fair." There was a pause. I didn't feel it. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know Lorraine had that meeting scheduled with you. She didn't tell me who it was with." I raised an eyebrow. "But she had the company name, right? She knew who Evermark was." He nodded. "She did. And you didn't think to connect the dots when her pitch got rejected the same week we announced a new partner?" He rubbed his jaw. Maybe I didn't want to connect them. There it was. The closest I'd ever get to a real admission from him. We talked numbers. Strategy. What a potential partnership could look like. And when the conversation turned to leadership structure, I said one thing very clearly. If Lorraine has any executive role in the merged company, I walk. He didn't flinch. Understood. We didn't sign anything that day. But the tone had shifted. I wasn't the distraction anymore. I was the one setting the terms. And my dad, whether he could say the words or not, finally knew it. By the time the merger was officially announced, Evermark had tripled its client base. We weren't just the new disruptor anymore, we were becoming the model. The statement released by both companies was clean, boring, and perfectly corporate. A strategic merger designed to elevate service delivery, combining legacy excellence with innovation. What it didn't say, but what everyone in our world knew, was that this merger happened because my dad's company was bleeding relevance. And that it only came together because the distraction they tried to sideline had built something they couldn't afford to compete with. I'll never forget the look on Lorraine's face when she saw the press release. Not that I saw it in person. Someone sent me a screenshot of a staff Zoom call where she was in the background, frozen mid-blink, looking like she'd seen a ghost. I guess in a way she had, just not the kind she expected. See, this wasn't about revenge for me anymore. Not entirely. It had become something deeper, about rewriting the story that had been told about me for years. The one where I was the sensitive, unfit, peripheral kid who didn't belong in the rooms where things were decided. For most of my life, my narrative had been written by other people. Lorraine told colleagues I was immature. My dad said I needed to toughen up. Even extended family had this image of me as the kid who never quite fit into the mold. Now I was the mold. But here's the twist. Being at the top doesn't magically make you healed. It doesn't fix the part of you that still lies awake at 3 a.m. remembering that one family dinner where everyone laughed when Lorraine made a joke about my voice cracking during a presentation. Success doesn't erase humiliation. It just gives it better furniture to sit on. I started therapy around that time. Not because I couldn't handle the stress of the business, but because I could finally afford to slow down and realize how much weight I'd been dragging behind me. How much of what I built was fueled not by vision, but by spite. My therapist, Amanda, said something that stuck with me. Anger's a powerful engine, but it'll drive you into walls if you don't switch gears. I didn't want to crash, so I shifted. I started giving talks at local business schools, quietly, anonymously. Not as the guy who owned a shipping company, but just Jordan, the guy who figured out how to get taken seriously in a world that had written him off. I told students, build what you wish had existed when you were invisible. Some of them nodded. Some of them took notes. And one girl came up to me after a talk, with tears in her eyes, and said, "Thank you. My stepdad says the same things yours did." That's when I realized this story wasn't just mine. One night, after one of those lectures, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Lorraine. "We haven't spoken since the pitch. I know I wasn't kind to you. I see now that I underestimated who you were and who you could become. I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll believe I truly mean that." I stared at the message for a long time, and I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't grown, but because growth doesn't mean you have to open every door that once slammed in your face. A few weeks later, my dad invited me to his birthday dinner. I'd skipped the last 3. This time, I said yes. The dinner was awkward. My step-siblings made small talk. Lorraine was oddly quiet. My dad kept trying to include me in every conversation like he was overcorrecting years of silence. When the check came, I paid it before he even noticed. Later, in the parking lot, he pulled me aside. "You've done well," he said again. "Better than any of us expected." I looked him in the eye. "You know, if you just said you were proud of me back then, maybe I wouldn't have had to work this hard to prove anything." He sighed. "I know." That was the closest he ever got to saying sorry. I took it. Not because it was enough, but because I didn't need it to be. I went home that night, poured a glass of whiskey, and pulled out the old notebook I used to scribble in during his meetings. The ones I wasn't allowed to attend anymore once Lorraine came into the picture. Page after page of ideas. Business plans. Meeting notes I had no context for. A young man trying desperately to understand a world that refused to let him in. I smiled. I had become that world. The next morning, I called Lena and told her we were starting a mentorship program for first-gen business students. Evermark would fund it. I'd personally mentor 3 students per year. She loved the idea. I called it Project Distraction, because some distractions change the whole direction of the room if you let them speak. There's a strange kind of peace that settles in when you no longer need validation from people who once held it hostage. The announcement for Project Distraction went live 2 weeks after my dad's birthday dinner. The press release was simple. Evermark announces a fully funded mentorship initiative for underrepresented young entrepreneurs. Led by CEO Jordan Maddox, the program offers 3 students per year the opportunity to build something they believe in, with resources, guidance, and complete creative freedom. The name, Project Distraction, sparked questions from business journalists. Some thought it was clever branding. A few asked if it referenced the corporate noise we were trying to disrupt. I didn't correct them. The truth behind that name was mine to know. A month later, we held our first round of interviews. One of the candidates was a young woman named Syra, 19, first-generation college student. She walked in with oversized glasses, nerves vibrating off her like heat waves, and pitched an idea for a logistics app designed to help immigrant families navigate relocation. She stuttered through the first 3 minutes, but I didn't interrupt her. I let her breathe, let her exist in the room without having to prove she deserved to be there. When she finished, she said, "I know it's not perfect. I'm not really business-why." I smiled. "You're more business-why than most of the people I know." I told her about how I used to sit outside conference rooms with my little notebook while grown men decided what I was and wasn't worth. How I'd watched people in press suits dismiss the kind of passion she had because it didn't come in the right packaging. I told her I was proud of her. She cried. And then she hugged me. That day, I realized something I hadn't even fully understood about myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't building out of pain or spite or to make someone look foolish in hindsight. I wasn't trying to fill the hole they left when they told me I didn't belong. I had already filled it. Quietly. Completely. I was building now for people like Syra. For the kid I used to be. For the misfits. The quiet ones. The ones someone once called a distraction. 3 months later, Project Distraction's first cohort launched their pilot ventures at an Evermark-sponsored event. We invited press, industry leaders, and, reluctantly, I invited my dad. He showed up, alone. He stood at the back of the room in a crisp gray suit, hands clasped in front of him like he wasn't sure whether to clap or salute. I saw him watching, really watching, as Syra got up on stage and told her story. How people underestimated her, how she used their doubt as blueprints. How Project Distraction had been the first place someone looked at her and didn't say, "Are you sure?" When she finished, the whole room stood. Even my dad. After the event, he came up to me. We stood near the catering table, next to a tray of untouched cheese cubes and lukewarm coffee. "You did good work here," he said. His voice was soft. "Tired. Thanks." He paused. "That girl, Syra, reminds me of you. She reminds me of who I could have been," I said. "If someone had given me space." He nodded. I wish I had. There it was. A real apology. Late. Imperfect. But real. I nodded once. I know. We didn't say anything else. But something unspoken settled between us. Not quite forgiveness, but something like a truce. An understanding that while the past couldn't be undone, the present didn't have to keep bleeding from it. That night, I went home to my apartment, 3 stories above the same street Lorraine once called too industrial for our brand. I looked out the window and saw the Evermark sign glowing on the opposite building. I thought about that kid with the notebook. I thought about the moment Lorraine called me a distraction in front of the board. And I thought about Syra, her voice shaky but clear as she talked about building something new from something broken. I pulled out my old notebook. Yep, still had it, and flipped to the back. There was a blank page. I wrote, "A distraction becomes a problem when it's loud enough to make people uncomfortable." I used to want to be quiet. Now I want to be disruptive. I used to want their approval. Now I want to build doors for the ones they locked out. I used to wait for permission. Now I hire the people who never got asked. I closed the notebook, sat back, and smiled. Because I finally understood something that took me years and a dozen boardrooms to learn. Being underestimated is exhausting, but it's also liberating. Because when no one believes in you, you get to define everything yourself. And once you learn how to build without their permission, they can never take it from you again.